firing it, but we're somewhere along the process. If we're not in the business of dismantling the gun, then we're in the business of putting it together and connecting it and passing it on to the next person.
Right. And that's the reason why we're talking about that today, because each of us are a part of the problem and each of us are a part of the solution. But just because I'm actually part of the factory or I'm on the assembly line, I don't necessarily see myself as being a part of the problem, or I don't see myself as being a part of the issue why the person at the end of the assembly line or the consumer actually takes the gun and starts shooting. We don't see where our part is. We see the person who's actually picking up the gun and shooting, or the one who picks up the knife and stabbing, or the one who's punching up someone until they die.
Yeah, but we only see that person because the media highlights that person. We don't see those on the assembly line, or really it should be the disassembly line, because we are disassembling who we actually are. We don't see those who work in the factory on the disassembly line, and the media doesn't focus on those. It doesn't highlight those, so we don't see them. And obviously we just go to what we're fed. Like pigs, we go to the part that we're fed to, instead of looking beneath the surface at the disassembly line and who actually runs the disassembly line. Because when you look at a factory floor, you have the workers, you have the progress chasers and the managers,
whip crackers,
and you have the director who you hardly ever see, but he has the most responsibility for that factory or that assembly or that disassembly line. So there's a whole host of people who come into play that we don't necessarily see. And it's interesting that when you speak to the youth, a lot of them say, well, we need to hear from the youth, we need to hear from the youth, let the youth talk, it's all about the youth now, it's our time now. They're just looking at the end product and saying it's all about the youth. Whereas there was an adult somewhere that helped to put that gun together. There was an adult somewhere who decided that guns needed to be brought into the area. There was an adult somewhere who was a politician who turned a blind eye and allowed that whole situation to happen. So it's not all about the youth. We see the youth, so it's a very good point. But behind all of that, there's a whole heap of adults that need to be pulled up. We need to be focusing on and targeting so that we can be a assembly line instead of a disassembly line. Assemble ourselves, reassemble ourselves, reorganize ourselves in the way that Allah God wants us to reorganize ourselves. And it's interesting, when we do our prayer, we are in an assembly. That's an assembly line. That's what I call an assembly line. Anyway.
And Allah said in the Qur'an, He said, make room in your assembly.
That's right.
Accept and appreciate that other people are in the same place as you, not necessarily fulfilling the same function, but living on the same earth.
Yes.
And again, that goes back to compassion. But really, that's exactly what we wanted to talk about today, was about the different stages of development. Allah said in the Quran, He said, each nation have been given their own acts of devotion. We have cycles within nature and patterns, ways of living. When He's talking in the Quran about have each nation having their own acts of devotion, we're not just talking about the specific way someone prays. So I may do some rak'ahs, or another person might pray like this, or another person may do a dua, or another person might just say, oh God, wherever. We're talking about our life.
Our parents' prayer was Lord, boy. Lord have mercy. That was our parents' prayer, for real.
But within that, we're talking about every nation being given, or every type of living being being given their own way of living. That's what we're talking about. The way that we act and the way that we live our life is supposed to be devoted to God. So that in itself is supposed to be an act of devotion. If we look at the birds have a cycle. They're chicks. Then they're chicks who are fed in the nest. Then they learn to fly and they learn to feed themselves. Then they fly the nest. You have butterflies, which are fat, ugly caterpillars. They start off as fat, ugly caterpillars. Then what they do is they isolate themselves from the rest of society within their own womb, which is a cocoon. They stay in there for a period of time. They germinate, they grow and develop, and then they emerge back into society as a butterfly. Plants are very much the same. So we can see that every living being has their own cycle. It's a mathematical and scientific thing. Just the same way as childhood and life for human beings has a process. It has a mathematical and a scientific cycle that it should follow. But because we're disobedient to God in our actions, not necessarily in the way that we're saying things, because we talk a good talk, brothers and sisters, but in us learning how to obey God, it means that we've got to refer back to Him in everything that we do. And if we're not doing that, we're coming out of the natural order. And when we come out of the natural order, all of us suffer the consequences. We don't end up being that beautiful butterfly that we could be, or the bird that can feed itself and feed from God and how God wants it to be.
We end up being the ugly duckling, right?
And we end up being the ugly duckling, or even staying an ugly little caterpillar, because we don't know how to put ourselves, or how we need to go about the process of putting ourselves back into a womb or the cocoon.
Is it possible to go back into the womb or the cocoon?
Well, yes, it is, but it's not necessarily the same womb that you came out of.
Okay.
You know, we always say, and Nicodemus said that in the Bible, can I go back in the womb of my mother? No, you can't. Yeah. But you don't want to go back into the womb of your mother because that can't sustain you. But then we come out of the womb of our mother, and then we go into another womb, which is the family home. Then we emerge into another womb, which is the community. Then we go on and have our own, which is our own family home. And then that becomes a womb for the children of the future.
So it's an ever-increasing womb, it's an ever-increasing circle to hold us in that stage of development.
Yeah.
And then when we outgrow that stage of development, we come forth, just like from the womb, we come forth into a new realm.
That's
that
right.
we must grow and develop in.
That's right. And learn how to drain and extract the resources of the environment that we're in. And that's what the acts of devotion are. Because Allah said in the Qur'an, it was so beautiful, brothers and sisters. He said that the birds eat, the bees eat, everything in nature eats, but yet we worry about whether we're going to eat or not. I mean, it's out of the natural order. It's illogical. It's out of the natural order of God and out of the nature of God. But because we've come so far away in some things, it's removed us in others, and we don't always see the effects of what, or we don't see the cause of why we're in the condition that we're in. Now, even in the instance of preconception and birth, and I'm trying to find a new way of speaking, because we're not using the actual radio format because it's for television as well. So I have like my little cards, so I'll be referring to my little cards as I go along. I find that works better for me. Now, in the stage of preconception of birth, we have genetic defects or genetic traits. You know, slavery has been perpetuated because as parents, patterns of behaviour and ways of thinking and ways of doing things have been passed down through the generations. Like even with bad eyesight, you'll find that there's whole families who will wear glasses, or you know, have different specific illnesses or ailments within their family, or even like a genetic trait of being able to draw really well. I can draw, you know, Allah God blessed me to be able to draw, and Elijah or Joseph is really good at drawing, and he's Brother Chris can draw as well, can't you? Or you can draw a little bit. You can draw, brothers and sisters, but you can see that.
I have it known I was the best drawer in my class at school.
Wow.
And I drew the mural that was up in the corridor that all the children had to go past.
Wow.
So I can draw a little bit better than just a little bit.
Just a little bit. So
by Allah's grace and mercy.
Allahu Akbar. So in him having that quality and that trait, and in me having it, the two of us, when we had Joseph now,